I'm Rich Andreski, Bureau Chief for Public Transportation at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. And I'd like to welcome you to Along the Lines, a podcast series where we'll explore current issues and ideas on Connecticut's public transportation system. Welcome to another episode of Along the Lines, a podcast of the Connecticut Department of Transportation. One of the few bright spots to come out of the pandemic is that our air became noticeably cleaner. With a majority of Connecticut's workforce working from home, there was an immediate reduction in pollution caused by greenhouse gas emissions. The drastic reduction of people commuting to work and traveling has led to a dramatic decrease in pollution by more than 80% here in Connecticut. Many essential workers switched to riding a bicycle as their mode of transportation. Whether it was for recreation or commuting to their jobs, it was clear that the number of people riding bikes increased in 2020. In fact, most retailers could not keep them in stock. The future of cycling in Connecticut is important to us, as each single occupant vehicle taken off the roadway helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. But safety is always a big concern for people who bike, as most streets were designed to move cars. Even though there was less traffic on Connecticut's roadways last year, the number of pedestrians and bicyclists killed and injured actually increased. A report from the Governor's Highway Safety Association found a 48% increase in the number of pedestrians killed in Connecticut, with similar increases found across the country. I think everyone remembers their first bike. Back then, a bike meant freedom and fun, but that only lasted until we got older and then wanted a driver's license. Once that happened, the bike was pushed to the back of the garage and our love affair with the car began. However, we know that in the U.S., biking as a mode of transportation is on the rise. The problem is that bike infrastructure is lagging behind. So today we'll look at a bicycle as a form of essential transportation and hear what is being done on the local level to make our streets safer. Our first guest is Holly Parker. Holly has been in Connecticut since becoming Yale University's Director of Sustainable Transportation in 2007. Before that, Holly started the Commuter Choice Program at Harvard University. Her transportation planning firm, Less Road Traveled, consults municipalities, campuses, and others on bicycle and pedestrian projects, and deployed the first car share and bike share programs in Connecticut. Holly recently assisted with the deployment of an electric scooter share program in the Hartford area, and is now working with the town of Guilford on a bike and pedestrian plan. Welcome to the program, Holly.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you for this really thoughtful podcast series and for the DOT's attention to healthy and sustainable modes of transportation.
So glad we could get together. Thanks for being with us. And our second guest is Will Wright, an attorney and safe streets advocate who lives in Stamford with his family. Will became involved in People Friendly Stamford 5 years ago after living in downtown Stamford and experiencing how difficult and dangerous it was to walk and bike around. Will lives a few miles now outside of Stamford's downtown, but he still bikes to the office a few times a week during the warmer months. Hey, Will, welcome to the program.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for having me. And hi, Holly.
So glad to have you both here. I know how passionate you are about what is so-called active transportation, the idea of using your own body to move around, whether it be walking or biking. And so, Will, perhaps we can start with you to talk a little bit about your organization, People Friendly Stamford. Could you tell our listeners a little more about that?
Sure. People Friendly Stamford is a safe streets advocacy group. It was founded about 10 years ago here in Stamford. And our mission is to make Stamford's streets safe for everyone. So really what we're talking about is making it so if you want to get on a bike and ride around Stamford, or if you want to walk somewhere, it's safe for you to do that. So really we're talking about, shifting the focus. So roads aren't just for moving cars, but more for moving people. And if you want to do that in a safer, more environmentally friendly way too, like a bike, that's something that we're advocating for and try to make Stamford a safer place to do that.
So, Will, are members of your organization like-minded folks that have that vision? And sort of what is your ongoing charge in terms of making that vision a reality?
We're a pretty diverse group in terms of our interests. I'll be honest, there are plenty of people in my group who, as of right now, don't bike very much in Stamford because they very frankly, don't feel comfortable doing so. And I think that that's, representative of the city as a whole. There's a ton of untapped potential of people who would love to be able to bike around but don't. Really, the focus, we say, needs to be on infrastructure. So, road design, things like bike lanes, improved sidewalks. Really, cities around the country and around the world have shown that if you don't design the roads to make it, make people feel safe to be on them, then people won't feel comfortable to bike and they just won't do it.
So, Will, are you one of those folks that rides? You're not a fair weather rider. You ride your bicycle in all weather, including snow and rain.
Yeah, it's tough. If there were, let's say, my commute is about 2.5 miles to get to my office. If there were bike lanes that were especially protected bike lanes, I would love to ride more in the winter, but especially with snow on the road and things like that, it's tough.
Oh, no apologies necessary, but I think you raise a good point, which is there are individuals that choose to use a bike to get around every day. So folks sometimes have the impression that bicycling is only for nice weather, but we've all seen individuals out there in all sorts of weather. So and they deserve the same kinds of accommodations as other users of the road. So, Holly, can you tell us a little bit about your firm, Less Road Traveled? Love that name, by the way. What is the mission of your organization?
Thank you. Well, we do work with municipalities and universities and any institution that wants to reduce the impact of driving. So, we're looking for ways to get people to a work site or a campus, in more sustainable modes of transportation that aren't contributing to traffic congestion and emissions. Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought up safety, because it's not just bicyclists, but also, of course, pedestrians, wheelchair users, and transit riders that are the more vulnerable users of the road and are more likely to perish in a crash with a car. Those people are also disproportionately low income, indigenous, people of color, or children and older adults. And the background from a planning and engineering perspective is that for several decades, traffic engineers have used something called vehicle level of service ratings to evaluate transportation facilities, which effectively delivers roadways that take only motor vehicle speed and delay into account, so sort of accommodating the convenience of the motorist. But fortunately, for the last decade, transportation planners and engineers have been working to expand the concept to include other modes of transportation and level of traffic stress or bicycle level of service are working their way into the engineering lexicon, as well as multimodal level of service. And these consider more or all of the users of the street rather than only drivers.
Yeah, that's so important, right? To bake in the idea that all users of the roadway should be considered. I think the more it's standardized and becomes part of the normal course of business, right? The idea that bicycle accommodations are somehow something that needs to be considered independently or specially is missing the point, right? That roads really are for all users, and we need to think more and do more of that. This notion, I think some people still have, is that bikes are for recreation. But what can you tell us about the value of biking in terms of our carbon footprint and in terms of mobility for everyday purposes?
Sure. Well, transportation is responsible for 38% of greenhouse gas emissions. So really, bicycles being a zero emission vehicle are certainly part of the solution. And the new popularity of electric bicycles, e-bikes, has really broken down even more of the barriers people have felt historically towards biking, because they can go further and faster and they require less effort. So if you're elderly or you have, if you're not a super athlete, you can still use a bicycle to get around. And they have things like cargo carriers on the front if you get a cargo bike, or baskets and racks to help you carry things. So not only is biking is a low emission or zero emission mode of transportation, it's also going to help families have more mobility at a more reasonable cost.
It really is. That's a theme on our podcast, this idea that whether it be public transportation or active transportation, it really is checks so many boxes, right? It's the green way to travel. There are economic motivations for doing so. And it really addresses quality equity issues, which is, owning a car is a financial burden to families. It is a liability in many respects in a city, having to park and store and a vehicle. There's insurance costs. So yeah, couldn't agree more with you, Holly. But Will, what we hear sometimes from cyclists is that there is a concern. There's increased distracted driving on our roads. Cars are going faster. Many times we saw that in the pandemic, where although vehicle volumes were down, we saw speeds on our roads increasing. Motorists were driving faster. So now with cars going faster and people glancing down at their phones, there is a concern that cyclists have sometimes that they're not safe. So do you think if we build more biking infrastructure, we can move the needle in terms of how many people are using bikes as a mode of transportation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like the increases in, crashes and things like distracted driving, like you mentioned, like it really just hammers home the need for actual infrastructure on the road. So, bike lanes and especially protected bike lanes. So you have a physical barrier between you. You as the person on the bike and someone in a car maybe going 40, 45 miles an hour past you. There was a study done in New York City. They've done a great job, building out their bike network in the last 15 plus years. And when they first started doing that, they put in protected bike lanes along 9th Avenue in Manhattan. And they did, several, I think it was 7 or 8 block pilot. And they showed that when they put in a protected bike lane along that stretch, the number of crashes went down, I think it was 47 or 48%. So, it's common sense, but it's borne out by the numbers that, when you have bike lanes and especially protected bike lanes, you do have a huge decrease in crashes and injuries and things like that. And then the flip side too is that the amount of people biking went up, by huge numbers. And there were also economic runoff effects from that. Retail sales on that corridor where they put in the bike lanes actually went up 48% during the time when they had the bike lanes in. So, and that after that pilot was done, they used that information to justify the huge expansion of the bike network throughout New York City, and those benefits were much more widespread then. So, these are things that we've seen work in cities, like I said, all across the country, all across the world, and Connecticut, we've made some strides, but we do have a long way to go. Stamford, a few years ago, we had 2 or 3 miles of bike lanes, and now we have 15. And there's, several more, at least 10 plus miles planned to be added in the next year or two. But that's out of a total road network of 315 miles in our city. So, that puts it in perspective that the vast majority of our roads don't have any bike lanes on them right now.
Yeah, really, safety, as in all modes of transportation, right, has to be really at the core of policymaking, and protected bike lanes are really the gold standard in keeping people safe. So, Holly, what are your thoughts on how we're doing on safety and protected bike lanes here in Connecticut?
I think that we have a complete streets, some nice momentum on complete streets. At least 6 of our communities have complete streets policies. And complete streets gets at that earlier point I made about considering all of the users of the street when we do planning, when we're going to be improving a street or changing an intersection or adding sidewalk. Just making sure that we're planning properly for the pedestrian, the cyclist, and the transit rider, and the wheelchair user, and so on. Is there a bike lane? Is there sidewalk or crosswalk? So that's permeating slowly through our communities that have complete streets policies or there are a couple of initiatives afoot as well. Bridgeport is working on a complete streets design guide, and Stratford is also considering it. So as that starts to happen, these become real amenities that are considered in the design of the roadway. So it's happening slowly. It's the state DOT, of course, has a complete streets policy, and which sets aside a certain percentage, albeit a very low one, of project funds to provide this kind of infrastructure for bicyclists and pedestrians. So it is starting to happen slowly.
Yeah, Holly, so some of our most popular programs at the DOT, although small in dollars, almost universally applauded are the bicycle and pedestrian programs. Folks love them, whether they be trails or protected bike lanes or on-street bike accommodations. People just can't get enough of these projects. So I think there is, at least from where I sit, there seems to be increasing momentum and interest in these types of investments.
Yeah, and Rich, as you and I have discussed in the past relative to our transit facilities, if there's safe bike parking at our major bus and train hubs to complement things like bike racks on buses, and that you can bring your bike on the train, people are more likely to make a sustainable multimodal trip, and we can slowly reduce the necessity for the roughly 15 private shuttles that create congestion and emissions on their way to New Haven and Stamford's train stations, for example.
It's a really good point, because our transit network, as robust as it is, there is always that challenge of getting from your bus stop or your train station to your final destination, or vice versa, getting to the train station or the bus stop. And bicycles are a big part of that. For our listeners, our statewide transit fleet is equipped with bike racks, so you can ride your bike to the local bus stop, and when the bus pulls up, right on the front of the bus, there are spaces for your bicycle. So we're proud of that, as well as our onboard policies. We over the years have been working to expand our onboard bring your bike on board policy. So great way to get out and experience Connecticut. Just a little commercial for CT Transit and CT Rail. So Holly, one more question for you on sort of your role. I know you've recently become involved in the town of Guilford to look at ways to make biking and walking more safer and more accessible. What are the findings of that effort so far, and what can other municipalities learn from your efforts?
Well, one of the things we are doing in Guilford is to ask the community how they feel about their transportation infrastructure, and we had 628 responses to our second survey, which is really phenomenal response. And of that number, 68% indicated that there are parts of town they wish they could bike or walk to, but feel unsafe doing so. So that really helps focus the attention on the areas that are a problem that people would like to see improved.
We often say, start with the customer in mind. In this case, it's the cyclists that are out there today. What are they experiencing? Couldn't agree with you more. So, Will, let's come back to you. You've been an advocate in Stamford for some time, promoting cycling and walking as a friendly way to get around. What have you seen as the biggest changes in attitudes towards cycling over the last 3 to 5 years?
It's definitely slow moving. Like I mentioned, we have seen a pretty significant, at least for Stamford, increase in our the amount of bike lanes we have. But we still haven't reached that kind of critical point where there's a true bike network. So we are seeing some changes. You do see people on the bike lanes and on our roads, but honestly, to be candid, I think it's too early to really be talking about a culture shift yet. We're still in the early stages where cars are the dominant mode of transportation around Stamford, and we're getting there, but we still have a little bit to go before we kind of hit that critical mass of like a true bike network where you can get from point A to point B, and all of that will be within a bike lane. And, that's where I think we'll see the numbers really explode. It's tough. It's also a function of less funding. Rich, also, you mentioned the state is around railroad stations trying to encourage people to bike and use alternate mode of transportation. But I will say in Stamford, the state's about to spend $100 million on a parking garage for cars. And I know the parking garage needs to be replaced here, but we would love to see, some of that 100 million, a fraction of it at least, to go to, things like improving the bike network around the railroad station too. So, all those things that we're making progress, but we're still, I think, in the early stages.
Yeah, Will, I appreciate your comment. Yeah, so just a little plug for what we're doing in Stamford. Yes, we are replacing an existing older bus garage with a new garage, but we have in the works shortly a master planning study that will be looking at the whole Stamford Transportation Center campus and looking at making that access to that station much more friendly, pedestrian friendly, bike friendly. And that work is going to kick off this spring. There'll be stakeholder outreach. We'll be doing some public meetings, customer surveys. And what that will produce is a set of recommendations. And our intention is to move forward quickly and implement those recommendations, which may include, better bike accommodations and street network changes to improve access to the station. So couldn't agree with you more. We definitely need to do more in that location.
Yeah, and you even said yourself that some of the most popular projects that the state does are the bike and walking trails, pedestrian type projects, and they're relatively cheap. It's so much cheaper to put in a bike lane than it is to build a road or a bridge. So you get huge bang for your buck with these types of projects, and that they go a long way towards not just the safety aspect, which is huge, but promoting healthier lifestyles, reducing car dependence, cutting down on carbon emissions, fighting climate change, things like that. So it's they're popular, and really it shows, like, once projects like this are built, people do love them.
Research published this month from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that in cities where bike infrastructure was added, cycling increased up to 48%, more than in cities that didn't have bike lanes. And that's important because we are still hearing in public meetings from people who say, well, those squirrely cyclists and pedestrians are part of the problem. They are, they behave unpredictably and they make us really nervous when we're driving. To the extent that we can get more drivers out on roads experiencing what it feels like to be that cyclist or that pedestrian, because we've built the facilities that welcome them, we're going to start to change that culture.
You know what is becoming apparent to me in this conversation is that, the idea of cycling has been evolving, right, in the public mind, that cycling was sort of a recreational mode, but in fact, it is part of our transportation mix now, and it should be. And if we look at it as another mode of transportation, that the accommodations we're making are not nice to haves, but really a great alternative to other ways of getting around. So, I'm loving this conversation. I'm just thinking as we, get to the end of our conversation here, I'd like to end with a question on the future. So we have seen so much change occurring in the last decade, especially around transportation. A topic that comes up frequently is the idea of disruption in transportation. We saw disruption take place in the form of on-demand transportation, Uber and Lyft type services. We've seen transportation being disrupted in terms of electrification of our transportation sector. So what is the big idea going forward for active transportation, both bicycle and pedestrians? And, where aspirationally, if you could wave a magic wand, what would things look like here in Connecticut in the 5 to 10 year time frame? So, Will, why don't you go first?
One thing that I think can really change things that Holly mentioned this before is e-bikes. They are just, to use an overused phrase, like potentially a game changer on this. Like they really open up cycling to a lot of people. So yeah, I mean, something like that is something to keep an eye on. It's a relatively new technology or, type of transportation that's really exploding popularity now. And, talking about 5-10 years down the line, we would love to see just a shift in focus away from, needing your car to go everywhere around town and being able to walk places you want to go and to bike places you want to go or take a scooter or something else. Really just a shift in mindset where a car just isn't necessary for every aspect of your life. Especially short trips like to the grocery store, to your children's school, things like that should be accessible by bike or on foot. And we'd love to see a huge investment from our towns and cities and from the state, and there's money coming from the federal government. So that's the kind of transformation of our towns and cities that we would love to see in the next 5-10 years.
The e-bike, you've got me interested. It's come up a couple times here. I've never been on an e-bike, but I'm going to definitely try it. And I think, by the way, with Connecticut and our hilly areas of the state, I think e-bikes sound like a fantastic option. Holly, you were going to say?
I was just going to say that also, as of the date of this recording, we're about to see electric scooters launch in Hartford, Connecticut. And I think that the region, the capital region, is also looking at a regional bike share system as well, which will likely be comprised of electric bikes. So we're on the precipice of a new era in which people have access to these new forms of more sustainable, more active transportation. Over 35% of all of our trips in this country are under 2 miles. I mean, that's a really easy e-bike or e-scooter trip.
So, Holly, I'll give you the last word on this. 5 to 10 years, what's your aspirational goal for our bike programs here in Connecticut?
Well, I think we're in a great moment right now in which the pandemic has forced a lot of people outside, and I see people walking and biking in groups as families past my house every day, and much more so than ever before. And I think if we can use that moment and maybe some new infrastructure funding from the federal government, we put those. We sort of take that energy and momentum and improve the infrastructure for walking and biking, and I think the public is ready for it.
Well, thanks again to my guests, Will Wright from People Friendly Stamford and Holly Parker, owner of Less Road Travel. Today we discussed street safety and the essential transportation offered by a bicycle. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes where we'll talk about scooter and bike share and other active transportation modes. Remember, you can find previous episodes of Along the Lines on your favorite podcast platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud. I'm Rich Andreski. Join us next time for another episode of Along the Lines. Thanks for listening to this episode of Along the Lines. This is your host, Rich Andreski. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please remember to subscribe and share.